How to start? Well, they say death is like a sniper. Youth knows not his presence. Maturity runs scurrying for cover, and wisdom sees him smile and goes about her business, knowing he will take her when he will. My dad was young. He was 67 years old when he died suddenly, falling on his face at a grandparents' day at the school. So it was a sudden death at 67. So it was hard. Um, and it was like a sniper's death in some way. He had a stenotic valve from having rheumatic fever as a kid, a disease that nobody really remembers anymore, but that's what ultimately brought about his demise. I do remember a few months before his death when he was visiting us for the last time and had my first son, who's now like 30 years old, on his chest, a good stein of German beer next to him on the counter, and just a beatific look on his face, like he was genuinely in paradise. And that's how I like to remember him. My inheritance of my father was really his work in some ways. He was a campus minister for a long time, but worked in the area of science and religion. And we had a series of letters for 20 years so that, his memoriam to his ministry was the first science religion publication I ever had. But it was those 20 years of letters that just really us trading back and forth. He was a minister, I was a scientist, talking about the relationship between religion and science, how they could both be oxen on the same yoke and pull together rather than apart, even though they might bump each other now and again. So those letters were an important part of our relationship. And they were real letters. I mean, we miss correspondence now, that flow of ink on paper, which I really love. I still keep a journal, and ink flowing out of my pen is just part of the intimacy of that, of doing that. But that was true for letters I wrote from him in college, in graduate school, when I was in California for a year, and when I finally came to Pennsylvania and became a college professor for a while. First 12 years I was a college prof. I was writing my dad every week or 10 days, these long 8 to 10 page letters about all sorts of things. So that was an important part of what went on between us. Part of those letters, though, my dad was always kind of a judge. I know he was proud of his sons, all three of us, because we talk about it. And he'd always brag to the others about one of us, about why they should be more like the one that wasn't there. So he rarely expressed his pride directly, but we'd hear about it from each other. So I knew it was really there. And I had this legacy of his. Now, correspondence is interesting. I mean, we miss that, and we'll lose something to history by not having collections of letters between people that were a big part of the record of history for a long time. I used to tell my students all the time that, from writing letters, actually, that the reason that writing was such an important part of higher education is when you talked, your memory could be fallible. You had plausible deniability. You could say, I didn't really say that. You didn't understand me, whatever. And you could deny it. But if you write it down, it's externalized and you can't. Moreover, it's part of critical thinking. You can look back and say, boy, that was a stupid thing to say, or why do I think that's true? Or that's a clumsy way of having expressed that. So you can do things with it that you cannot do with just talking or texting or tweeting or whatever. The other part of it, though, is that business of being able to deal with your shit, think through things on paper. And half of correspondence wasn't communicating to another person. It was working with words and dealing with your own stuff and justifying your behavior to yourself. And of course, in the case of my father, to him, where he was always really interested, not so much in the religious side, but whether I was doing something that mattered. And that's part of that legacy, part of that inheritance. Well, my job as his intellectual inheritor in some ways was to clean out his study. And there were books all over the place, of course. So I spent a number of years bringing back a trunkload full, a couple boxes full. And there's an old friend of his that had a used bookshop in Lancaster that I could bring the books to. So that was a big part of when I'd visit my mom and visit, my old hometown in Indiana, that's what I'd be doing. But then my mom had a stroke and had to be moved to a home. So it was time for us to clean out the rest of the detritus. His desktop was cleaned off, but everything else was still there. My brother wanted his file of sermons. I got the scary Hodgel woodcut of Christ in Gethsemane that he kept on the back of his study door when he agonized over sermons. But the last thing I did was clean out his desk. And it was one of those big oak desks with, a table for his big Royal typewriter that I took to college with me. I found the box from the 75th Infantry from when he was in Belgium in the Second World War. Then I opened the middle drawer on the left side, which is about letter-sized drawer. And I opened that, and in that drawer was every letter I had ever written him. I was moved. I mean, I wept. It was just an incredible thing to see. So I took about an hour and started reading through them. And I decided I really didn't like that arrogant, self-aggrandizing, obnoxious little twit, and I just bagged him up and pitched him. I'm still sure my dad is proud of me. I've done so much since then. His early death probably freed me to get tattoos, get the same kind of weapon his lieutenant, who was killed by a sniper in the Second World War, probably had, to get divorced, but also to live the life that I could build on my own, even without those letters. So I know he's still there. He's there when I walk down a deck of the Oceanic Hotel on Star Island, New Hampshire, and felt his gait in mine and felt him looking through my eyes. So that's part of being with him now. Thanks.